Hi there, guys. So, in the last week or so, there's been a real ramping up of online activity following the Charlie Kirk assassination in America, and then this weekend, the Unite the Kingdom rally in the UK. And I wanted to talk a little bit today about the narrative around these events and the way in which the right wing or the far right they shape our talking points and how they progress the talking points around these incidents and events in their favour. So I'll start with the Charlie Kirk murder. Obviously we don't have the full information about the killer's motive or any ideology as yet, but the police, they now have a suspect in custody, and I'm sure that information, is going to come out in due course. But what was fascinating last week, or the back end of last week, was that before he was even apprehended, we had huge numbers of prominent right wingers in America and far right figures as well, denouncing sort of leftist ideology and radical Marxists, and claiming that the left are uniquely violent. And a reminder that this was all done before he was even apprehended, and we knew who was alleged to have killed Charlie Kirk. So then, obviously, when it's transpired that it appears that this is a white kid, who was local and who seems to have grown up in a normal sort of conservative family, that narrative's now changed. What we now have is a fevered commentary that this kid was radicalized at college, or he was sort of taken in by trans ideology, due to a personal relationship, or perhaps even video games played a role. We now have this kid's sort of motivations and ideology being ascribed to external forces, downplaying his own agency and therefore sort of individualizing his crime. But as a thought experiment, I wanted to think a little bit about how those same people who took to Twitter last week to decry these leftists, how would those same people react if this guy had turned out to be a black kid who had grown up in a liberal city and, perhaps who identified as some sort of Antifa radical, fighting against the white supremacist worldview? I can guarantee you that these people, they wouldn't be looking at what college he went to or what his family background might be. No, we'd bypass all of that, and we'd be spending all of our time talking about how this kid, represents the entirety of black people or leftists, how people in cities are representative of a sort of Marxist fifth column, and how we need to stamp out this worldview at its roots. But the point I'm making, or the broader point I'm making, is that depending on the identity of a criminal in any given situation, they're either a lone wolf who's been taken in by malign forces, or they're representative of an entire class of people. And the way you determine which is by, of course, skin colour, political outlook, or by religion. So then let's look at this Unite the Kingdom rally in London over the weekend. So apparently there were over 100,000 people in attendance. And there were some pretty ugly scenes as some of the attendees clashed with police. But in the aftermath of the event, I've seen sort of various right-wing figures on X, complaining about the media's reporting of the event. I've seen sort of false equivalence with other events. And I've also seen right-wing figures complain that it was labelled as a far-right event. Firstly, I'm not sure exactly why people are complaining about this being labelled a far-right event. Tommy Robinson, Elon Musk, Katie Hopkins, they're all far right. I'm not sure why that's upsetting people. They even identify as such, as far as I know. That's where they are on the political spectrum, so why are they upset about it? There was, at the event over the weekend, there was a speaker from the AfD party in Germany. They're well known as far right, and they've called for the mass return of people with a migrant background. What are we complaining about here? If someone calls me hard left, why, I'm not going to get upset about that. By some people's metric, that's probably right, even though I consider myself to be a sort of mild social democrat or democratic socialist. That's just where the Overton window is at the moment. I'm not going to get upset if somebody calls me hard left. Why would I? Just be honest about who you are and what you believe. Why is it so difficult, and why are people so upset about this? And then secondly, we had pictures over the weekend of the protesters, some of the protesters, throwing stuff at the police, getting into fist fights with the police. And all I could see online was, well, it's worse at Notting Hill Carnival. But it's a completely false equivalence. Notting Hill Carnival is a street festival with drinking, with merriment. And it has over 2 million people attending over the weekend. It goes on late into the night. Of course, there's going to be a little bit of trouble. Obviously it's not good. We don't want any crimes committed. But it's just a nonsense comparison. What the hell are these people talking about? When you're on a political protest, and especially when you're claiming that you're there to unite the kingdom, is it really a great idea to get coked up or boozed up and start throwing things or throwing punches at the police? And, this is why I mentioned about false equivalence. This is not a festival or a bloody knees up, is it? It's a political demonstration to make what I presume is a serious political point. And the correct comparison in terms of crime numbers would be with the, cancel Brexit protest or the Iraq war protest or the anti-austerity protest. So the point I'm making with both of these examples is just to consider really how the right wing and the far right use these incidents and events for their own agenda and for their own advantage, and how they bend the narrative to fit their own agenda regardless of the outcome. When something happens that can be pinned on their chosen bogeyman, that bogeyman is representative of an entire class of people every single time. So whether it's radical leftists, Marxists, black people, immigrants, trans people, the list of bogeymen goes on and on. But when something happens that is caused by someone on their side, they say it was just, it's just a lone wolf, or it was due to some external factor that sent that person down the wrong path. Or there's this sort of false equivalence and these distraction techniques, as I've just mentioned. If we, as in anybody else, sort of follows their playbook by suggesting that perhaps they might just have a systemic problem within their own subculture, then these people, they play the victim, don't they? They say stuff like, how dare you call us fascist? You're radicalizing us. Or how dare you call us far right? We're just concerned citizens and parents. At the heart of it all is just this fundamental dishonesty, really. And of course, that dishonest message just gets repeated over and over again and amplified by social media and to a large extent the mainstream media as well. So anything that doesn't fit into the agenda that I've talked about, that's just glossed over or ignored, or in some cases it's turned right on its head to further their agenda, as I mentioned. So to bring this all together, on the one hand, I'm extremely worried about the sort of direction of travel in the UK and the US. But then on the other hand, because this right wing or this far right worldview is a worldview without truth, it's not sustainable, and eventually it's going to eat itself. So the main worry or the main concern then is how much damage is going to get done before that happens. And I think sadly history suggests quite a lot. So yeah, it's a bit of a bleak one today, guys, but just wanted to touch on some of these recent events. Please let me know in the comments what you think about these incidents and these events. But yeah, thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.